Stay hungry, stay foolish.
So now on the Innovation Show, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Vince Means, blockchain evangelist. Welcome to the show, Vince.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you on the show. I'd love if you would, before we talk about the power of blockchain, talk about you and let us know a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I started out as a software developer, like 15, 16 years ago, and around 2011, 2012, I got into the crypto space. So around 2012, we started working on this exchange here in Europe called btcdirect.eu. That is going pretty well, of course, right now. On the other hand, since December last year, I started running this blockchain incubator and accelerator here in the Netherlands to really help all kinds of startups to start working on blockchain-based business models and apply it in real life. And another thing is a project called Mobotic, which is self-driving pods that are fully open source, open hardware, and based on the blockchain and how they transact and pay for their rides and pay for their maintenance and so on.
You were a real early adopter with all this technology, and you know, one of the things I heard you speak about before is that you see it as this collective brain. But when I heard you speaking, it reminded me, and we both played Lego as kids, as the green slate at the bottom on which you build everything, and it's up to you and your imagination how you put that together. I'd love if you would, Vince, tell us a little bit about how you see blockchain as this collective brain.
Yeah, so I always try to explain blockchain to people in the simplest way. So for me, the metaphor is easiest if you compare it to the human body. That right now, the internet was basically like the blood vessels and the nervous system, which created all the connections between all points in the body. And the blockchain actually is like a memory of all the things that get exchanged and a logic to work with all this data that is collected. So it can be compared to the brain. So for the first time, I really feel like we as humans, we get this collective intelligence that is broader than all of us and that is learning constantly from everything that we do. So from an evolution perspective, I think we're going to enter an amazing age where intelligence is something that we're going to see collectively instead of individually.
So all the other previous technologies were just improvements, but this is a paradigm shift. This is how you see it.
The metaphor I always use is if you look at the printing press or if you look at the radio and all these things, it was always an update of the infrastructure to connect, so of the roads and the network, so to say. Now this is really something new. This, in combination with artificial intelligence, I think it's going to be like the next level in development for us humans.
So how do you see that working then, Vince? So what kind of changes are we going to see from the world we know today?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me is I invented this word called walletization, which basically means that everything around us will start having basically its own bank account or its own wallet on the blockchain. And thereby will start becoming an autonomous asset that will start doing its own transactions. So I really foresee this future where if I walk into a building, every light bulb, every door, every room, it's basically its own entity that you start transacting with. Maybe you start paying for light for every second that you're sitting under it, and the light bulb starts paying to the room, and the room starts paying to the building. All these kind of interactions that now are way too much hassle to administer. They will become easy to do in the blockchain. So I think this is one thing. This makes it also very easy to start sharing a lot of things. So if a car has its own bank account, basically, and people that have a wallet on the blockchain, they can do transactions to this car, and they can go into contracts with this car on a very low barrier way. I think it will become super, super easy to start sharing all these things around us instead of seeing it as a hassle to lend it out to a stranger.
So we see this all the time with innovation and changing the paradigm, that there's so much vested interest, Vince, and there's so much status quo because people are incentivized to keep things as they are. How are we going to get around those things?
I think I really like the quote from Buckminster Fuller, that if you want to fight something, you better come up with a totally new idea that makes the old one obsolete. And I think it's going to go down like that. So, for example, if you look at renting a car purely from a price perspective, a rental company might have a high price to rent it out because it still has this human factor in between to sign a rental contract and to assess the risk and all these things, whereas a fully software-based solution based on the blockchain might make it way, way cheaper. And I think with a lot of these cases, like the price point of a blockchain-based solution will be cheaper, and therefore the transition will become a lot easier instead of needing to fight with something that's more highly priced or something like that.
You see as well sharing. So obviously, if I have excess in any way, which we all do, we have excess of some things and not enough of others. You see the blockchain as a way for everybody to share that.
I fully believe in an abundant future, so to say. What we have now is artificial scarcity, so to say. If you look at cars again as an example, I find it ridiculous that most of the cars stand still 95% of the time, whereas we could easily utilize them way more. So for me, I think it's just a matter of transition from stepping away from this thought of needing to own everything as a human or as a company and start shifting towards accessing all these things. I think in the future, there is no more gain from being the exclusive owner to something. It will actually be a hassle. And I think this shift will really drive the sharing model forward.
We talked to Don Tapscott about a song as its own business. So it will know who's using it, know who's not using it, be able to reward loyalty, etc., and early adopters. How does that work in your world?
Yeah, like for us here, we're also doing pretty extreme examples. So, for example, we have a fund here in the region that basically maintains the landscapes. And we're now doing a pilot where we're basically giving trees their own mini bank account or their own mini wallet on the blockchain. And for example, if someone wants to contribute to the landscape, they give a fee of €100 a year. We are now developing an app that basically tracks past which trees you walk. And once you walk past these trees, it will get registered. And at the end of the year, the contribution that you have towards the landscape, it will get evenly distributed to the wallets of the specific trees that you walk past by. And then the next step is that these wallets, they will have their own software to detect if there's enough funds in their own bank accounts, so to say, to start giving an assignment to a human again to plant the next tree and actually pay for it. And thereby we start shifting the maintenance of a landscape into a software-based approach that basically can go viral based on how people use the landscape. And with vehicles, we're actually doing the same thing. Like we're creating these self-driving vehicles that have their own wallet again. And they take payment for people that want to take rides in them. And they store this value in their own bank account. And then the next step is that if these vehicles make more money than they need to pay for recharging or they need to pay for updates or upgrades, then they will start giving assignments again to humans to build the next vehicle and actually pay for it. And I think this exponential business model where you don't have a central organization pushing something, but just a small template of something that can replicate, I think this is going to be one of the most powerful models for new business. I hope to see a lot of these things pop up in the near future.
You can see the massive benefit for governments, for example, and the amount of administration and mistakes and transparency that it will improve and the trust that it will put into a system. For example, public parks, some people use them, some people don't. With the blockchain, you see an opportunity where it will be self-regulating. It will know who uses it. That means we need to be connected. So going back to what we talked about, the Lego slate, what are the ingredients there? So IoT, Internet of Things, becomes really important. AI becomes important. How do you see all that coming together, Vince? I
think especially the combination of blockchain and AI I find really, really fascinating. You know, I have this initiative by Ben Goertzel, SingularityNet.io. I don't know if you saw it already. But basically, this becomes like this marketplace for AIs to start communicating together. So if one AI cannot find the answer or the solution for something, it can basically go to the marketplace and look for another AI that can, and it can actually start paying for each other's services. And I think thereby, like this becomes like this really organic growing intelligence that is gonna develop itself super rapidly. And if it cannot find an AI in the marketplace to come up with a solution, it can basically put up a bounty for a human to come up with an AI to tackle this problem. So I think this interaction is very interesting. On the other hand, it's all going to be about gathering data. So the whole IoT part, I think is super, super important because I really feel we're going to transition away from just having a monetary system, but also If you take, for example, the metaphor of a bank account, right now it only holds money. I think in the future, also your Fitbit and the steps that you do in a day, they will become like a balance on your bank account. So that next time you're going to go for insurance, for example, instead of just paying for it with money, you can also pay, for example, with the balance of the steps that you take. So you pay with your lifestyle. So all these things will start being tracked around you. Another example is here in the building of the campus where I now am. We basically have a thing called Proximica, which basically tracks the location of people inside the building. On the one hand, so we can start mapping out who are the people in the building that walk into other people's offices regularly. So who are the connectors? And we start incentivizing them, for example, with cheaper rents in the building. Then the next step that we're now experimenting with, and it might sound a bit scary, is that we're also adding an emotional tracker to these sensors. So, for example, we're going to measure if you're happy or stressed. And we're going to do an experiment where basically we're going to map out who are the people that bring stress and who are the people that bring happiness in the building. And we're going to start incentivizing people that bring happiness in the community, for example, with all kinds of perks and benefits in regards to the rent. And we're tracking, for example, if you walk to the coffee machine, that if you walk there together with someone that you didn't go to before, the coffee will be free. So we start really measuring out how this building is alive and how people are using it. So IoT is going to become really, really important as well. And the whole thing about IoT and gathering all this data for people to feel comfortable with, I think the blockchain was this last puzzle piece where I feel like, this data is not going to Google or to a very centralized entity that is going to take too much benefit out of all this profiling that they do. But it's really going to stay my data, and I only give access to people that I want in that moment. So it's like the blockchain gives this sense of privacy where you still feel comfortable with gathering all this data instead of freaking out that basically you're mapping out your whole life. So I think that's a big benefit.
Yeah. So privacy then, you mentioned it there, becomes really, really important, but also blockchain can be the solution to that, right?
Yeah, I think blockchain for me is this whole mindset of the individual again taking care of their own privacy or sensitive data. Like now we use our hardware wallets basically only to store our coins, but it won't be long until our medical data or our profiling data for advertising or all these things will basically be linked to our wallets on the blockchain, and we will start transacting with. In the future, if I go to an e-commerce platform and I start ordering stuff, then the whole data about my address and the whole data about what I ordered will be stored in my wallet, and I only give access to it, for example, to print the label for the postal service to send it out, or I will only give access for the order picker in the warehouse to select the right goods. And as soon as he did that, I revoke the access to this data. So it will become a super powerful mechanism where this data will not be stored with the companies that I purchase from or interact with, but I, as an individual, I will keep control and I will keep my own data with me. So I start becoming more and more comfortable with all this data that is created around me. And therefore, I really see that in the future we will have this bank balance, so to say, of all kinds of data points that we're now not even aware of. Maybe your GPS tracker will hold the balance of the locations that you're in the near future. And if you need to vote somewhere, you need to prove that at least 60% of your time you're there so that you're a relevant voter for that area. These kind of mechanisms.
The existing systems, so you mentioned Buckminster and Fuller, for the incumbents, people who have that data already, the Apples, the Ubers, people like that, how are we going to fix that? How are we going to regulate that and get that back onto the open blockchain?
For example, with Uber and with Booking.com and Airbnb, you already saw, I think it was in Sri Lanka, where the Uber drivers, they basically kicked out Uber and they came up with a fully decentralized model where they basically fully open sourced the database of drivers and their availability, and came up with a blockchain model that was not owned by a central entity running it, but basically by the crowd. And this is something you're going to see in the near future, like I think for every business model. I'm also for example, interested in Lockchain.co, which is like a booking platform for hotels that doesn't take like a central approach where you take like 30 to 70% of the booking commission as a platform, and then the hotel owner only gets a small amount. No, it's again a decentralized approach where basically the crowd can constantly fill the database, and everyone that interacts with it, they just pay, for example, a fixed fee instead of constantly a fee on the bookings. And therefore, I feel pretty confident that these big players, they will get challenged with decentralized models in the next 5 years, and they might become obsolete pretty quickly. I think it's very fascinating that the whole speed of how a company can grow and can descend is basically now already reduced to maybe 15 years from being a multi-billion company coming out of nowhere and basically disappearing again. And it will only get quicker. And all the businesses that depend upon this proprietary business model, where they have this proprietary database that is only for them and that is their competitive advantage, they will get challenged with a decentralized model where the whole database is the blockchain.
The governments are obviously incentivized to keep these big players alive as well. So there's going to be a huge challenge with that. So, for example, you have HQs of a lot of the big companies, the Facebooks, the Googles in Dublin,
Yes.
for example, in Ireland. And the governments are going to be reticent to let that all implode, to let those companies disappear. Do you see them being incentivized to take a step back in order to take a step forward?
Yeah, I think the whole model of government is going to shift in a lot of ways. So I think the first thing is that a lot of crowd-based alternatives will start nibbling at the feet of government and doing certain tasks probably way better. So small local initiatives that are taking over roles of government. Like here in the Netherlands, we have small things like where neighborhoods take control over things themselves again, of their parks, of their playgrounds, but also of their sense of security with neighborhood guards, with WhatsApp groups where they do things on their own. All these kind of things will definitely progress and start shifting that landscape. The only thing for government, I think, is pretty tricky is the whole taxation mechanism. That right now, because a lot of things are centralized, it's relatively easy to tax certain entities because they have a CEO and a board with a face and someone you can call up and someone you can hold accountable for things. And that's something that's going to really be tricky if you have these decentralized autonomous organizations, if you have assets that don't have a human or an organization anymore as an owner. Where does this responsibility fall to contribute to the whole? So that's something I think it's still something we need to figure out. But I think the whole taxation model will start shifting away from something that you do in hindsight based on some reporting that you create at the end of the year. It will start shifting to instant taxation on the moment that you do a transaction, for example. And I think we're going to move away from having just this one government that does everything to having micro governments as a service that basically do things across the globe. So I think the most services of government, they can be pretty generic no matter what country you're in. So you will start having government as a service providers basically popping up everywhere. And these templates for these DAOs popping up everywhere. And the only thing that's going to maintain is these things that are really, really geographically bound that are going to remain in place. But I think for me, it's fascinating if you look, for example, at something like Napster back in the days with the illegal MP3 downloads. It was very hard to regulate and it was very hard to stop. But in the end, it died because it didn't have a financial incentive to keep the whole network alive. And this is something with the blockchain, I think, should not be underestimated. The whole concept of mining is pretty genius that it has become this one-way direction. So even if as a government you cannot take the stance anymore that it will go away, there is an incentive for the crowds to keep this whole thing alive, and so you better start paying attention to it, or it will bite you in the ass.
Nice. And when we're on government then as well, UBI, so Universal Basic Income. So fast forward maybe 10, 20 years and blockchain is in place. A lot of these companies you're incubating are in the system. There's decentralization everywhere. Companies have changed their model. It means a lot of rote tasks have disappeared. There's a lot more people who are being upskilled. In the meantime, they're going to need to be subsidized some way, and UBI can do that. But you see as well the blockchain being the solution to that as well.
It's an interesting thought that, like UBI, I think still what's discussed, it's still like a rough version of what it should and could be. I'm thinking maybe in the near future you might get an UBI based on you as an individual, so that, for example, every human being would have its own currency, so to say, that basically devaluates based on all the transactions that you do throughout the lifetime, so that everyone gets, for example, an equal start and can decide how they spend their money during their lifetime, instead of having this fixed amount for everyone monthly coming in. I don't know. I think I think UBI is going to be the way forward, but how it will transition, for me, it's very difficult to predict. But I do believe it's coming, and I do believe it's coming quicker than most people realize.
That brings me to skill tokens. So, for example, in a UBI world, it's the gig economy. So how does the world of skill tokens fit into that?
Yeah, I think for me, the whole perception of paying for things with money, it's going to gradually fade away. Like I said before, we will start having these balances on our wallets or on our bank accounts with totally different indicators. So the skill tokens, I think, is a very, very powerful mechanism. So I'm a true believer in that approach. I think in the end, it's also going to be not just about literally the work that you do, but about the impact of the work that you do. So even, for example, working on something for a couple of hours is not going to be the full recognition you're going to get for that work. It's going to keep accumulating year after year based on the impact that of the thing that you did, that it made on the world. So, for example, if I create a car, let's stick with the car example. For example, my reward might not be my hours that I put into the car or the design that I created, but the amount of hours that people actually used it, or the things that they were able to do based on the fact that they had access to that car. And I think these kind of mechanisms will create this mega context framework for people to be valued and to be respected for what they did, and also to start thinking way more long term. Instead of delivering products or delivering a service just in that moment, really thinking about making an impact that will last super long and will contribute to the greater good.
Yeah, and we see this trend in businesses where it's not becoming so much what the product is, but what the company stands for. And you see the likes of Patagonia, Tom's Shoes in Argentina, and there's a huge drive towards provenance of food, for example. And blockchain, we after this show, we'll have Shane Riley, who's co-founder of Moi Coffee, and they're the first company that use Fairchain as a way to track the provenance. You see this being widespread in companies where they're almost being forced. This will be the only way for companies to operate.
Yeah, for me, a very simple thing. I'm mostly vegetarian, but for me, meat is always a great example. That if I would be in a supermarket and I see the whole story behind the meat and how it's created and so on, and I see a piece of meat next to it where I cannot see it, of course I would start distrusting it. And I think products like meat or all kinds of other sensitive product categories, they will start putting up the standard of transparency and the standard of you as a customer being able to audit and being able to look up where it all came from. And once you start expecting it from a couple of products, you will start wondering why it's not with other product categories, and we'll slowly start shifting also towards other things. And the thing is that I also don't believe it's just about the whole story of the product itself, but the fact you purchase this product will make you part of this journey. So, for example, if you purchase a sweater from a sweatshop in Cambodia, it will be registered on the blockchain that I purchased that sweater. So maybe next time I go into a job interview for a company that has certain values, they will not ask me for my resume, but they will ask me to prove that I'm not a hypocrite, basically, with the consumption that I do, and that I really live according to the values that they as a company have. I think these kind of mechanisms will start shifting more and more how we start feeling responsible for these things. And then another thing is that I also feel that once this whole journey of a product becomes visible, For example, if I have this sweater on and I can see not only the price tag and the material components of what it was made of, but I can also see how much transport kilometers were involved, because I can see every step of the whole supply chain, and I can see how many man hours were spent on it and all these kind of things. I will start as a consumer making different choices based on different value indicators about this product. Maybe in the near future, you will start having this limit as a consumer of, let's say, X 100,000 transport kilometers on your product. And every time you purchase something, it will be deducted from this limit until you reach it, and then you get, for example, a higher tax scale or something like that. I think all these things will become way more important in the near future.
The one thing that really jumps out to me, Vince, listening to you, is if you zoom up in the helicopter and you look what blockchain does, it brings trust and transparency into the world. And
context. Everything gets context. Everything moves away from being an isolated unit or an isolated transaction to something that is connected to everything. That is such a powerful thing.
Going back to your analogy of the brain and the body.
Yes, absolutely. For example, if you take the sweater again, and I can start seeing the whole impact that it has on other human beings, and I can start seeing how it will impact me in the future if I make this choice and all these things. It basically means that we're moving away from seeing products just as how do you say it, relatively dumb items or static items, to something that is basically a value that will impact a lot of other things. It's a network. Every product will become a network instead of an individual item.
Vince, to bring this home to people, so literally into the home place, I've heard you talked about a light bulb being smart, that it knows who's sitting under it and when and for how long. Could you give us a few examples of that for the home place?
For example, we have in the Netherlands, we have an architect called Thomas Rauw, and he basically says we got to move away from this product mindset of basically purchasing a light bulb and then every couple of years paying for a new light bulb, to only pay for the result. So can we create a business model where basically all the suppliers to this light bulb, they get connected to the end user, and they constantly stay in this constant relationship that they feel valuable to each other. So for example, with the light bulb, you go into a contract that you want to have light in your room of certain specifications. So for example, X lumen and this color and these kind of things. And you go into a contract with suppliers to basically supply that no matter what technology they use. And it's up to them to constantly deliver that this shines. And as soon as it doesn't shine anymore, the payment, for example, stops to them. So this is going to be, I think, a big shift, moving away from, if you put up a building or a house where we start making all these choices about certain materials or all kinds of things, where we see them now as individual products. We're going to start moving towards having only a focus on the end result of what these products will bring us. And we're going to move away from being focused on choosing all these things individually. Another thing is, I think the whole ownership model of these buildings, for example, will change. So it will become possible, of course, if you tokenize your house or turn it into, for example, all the components in your house, you put them, for example, with a certificate on the blockchain, and you start selling that. If you tear down your house in the near future, someone can purchase the right already to this component of your house. So, for example, to these windows panes or to these wooden panels or to these floorboards. So you can start making markets already about every component of your building. Another thing is that I think you're going to build up this huge data profile probably of how you live, how you use your house, what your sleep cycle is. Your phone does these things right now. And all these things will start building these balances that you can use in other places constantly. I think buildings are going to become these data engines instead of static places of concrete and wood. Another example is that if you look here at our campus again, we're now setting up an experiment, for example, where we basically, every time someone walks into a building, we start scraping their LinkedIn and their other public profiles, and we start mapping out like keywords about who this person is. And we do this with all the people that walk in and that walk out. And thereby we create this dynamic tag cloud of all the knowledge that is in the building that basically constantly shifts depending upon people walking in and out of the building. And then the next thing that we're going to do is that we're going to create like a layer around this for example, for our rental prices, that we're going to create these search prices based on the knowledge that is present on that day in the building. So, for example, if you have 50 blockchain experts in the building, it might be more valuable to me to work today in this building than if there were 25 AI experts in the building. And I can start experimenting with the value of the building, not so much being in the asset of the real estate, but more in the people and how it's used and what is present in that moment. It becomes alive. And maybe therefore you will start having these high score rankings in an area where in the morning you decide, hey, today I want to work on cars. Where are the most car people gathering today? And that's where I'm going to work. And you get like these liquid communities flowing around through certain buildings, for example.
I love that, man. And I was thinking when you were saying this, how it really changes everything, but there's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to change for people to be able to understand this. And one of the main things I see needing to change is education and the way we teach people. Like, we remove the imagination from people in schools. We incentivize them to be doing rote tasks and to memorize things, when
Yes.
in the world of blockchain, imagination is one of the most important skills. How do you see that world changing, the world of education, and what skills do you see as necessary for the future?
I think the scary part for me is if you look at computer games, for example, that when I grew up, you used to play with sticks in the woods, so to say, and you used to pretend that the stick was almost every imaginable item that you could think of. It could be a magic wand of a wizard, it could be a gun of a soldier, it could be anything. And right now, like most kids, they grow up with these fully developed 3D worlds that already have everything mapped out, and they basically, for me, you lose a lot of the imagination and creativity that you needed to come up with as a child. That is already filled in by all these things that are fully rendered. So I think that's something that we should not lose with children. That we keep stimulating this creativity to use something that is really basic, and think of it that it could be anything. So focusing on creativity and curiosity, in that sense, it's a magical thing. Another thing is, I think the whole speed of innovation, but many people have said this, this whole 4-year cycle, and then depending upon his knowledge for many years, it's outdated, it's not working anymore, and we need to start shifting to a model where basically you learn the skills to be curious and to find out things on your own. I think if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I always say I have a master's degree in Google, Wikipedia, YouTube, and interviewing expert people. Because for me, it really is almost everything you need in life. Like it's always there for the asking if you're curious. If you can trigger this curiosity in people, they will find their way out of anything. And this is something, I don't have a clear answer how you can teach curiosity. But if we can trigger this with people, they will overcome most of their things. And they should have this mindset that everything you do is temporary. We have this problem, I think, with maybe also with capitalism, where you set up a company and you think it's going to grow for 100 years or tens of percentages or dozens of percentages growth a year or whatever. And it's not natural. I think in nature, like every year, the leaves grow and the leaves fall off. And we need to start thinking about education in this similar cycle where you say, okay, I'm going to acquire this skill, I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to let go of it again. It's a natural cycle to make space again for something new to grow, and for something new to start small, and for something new to be excited about, just how excited you were the first time you learned the previous skill. Because you always lose this enthusiasm if you do something for too long. You lose this curiosity. And I see this with a lot of people that have the same job maybe for 10, 15 years. They lost their curiosity. They're in this automated mode instead of going in it with the passion of a child, being enthusiastic, curious, being driven by it. This is something we need to trigger.
Absolutely, and our job as parents is to create the environment for curiosity to thrive and imagination to thrive. I was laughing to myself, Vince, when you were saying about yourself as a kid with the stick. And I was thinking, in the future, the blockchain will know you took that stick, and you'll be your
Yeah.
parents will be charged extra for taking it off the
Yeah.
tree.
Yeah.
So
But for me, like as a child, if you had a bucket, it could be a crown, it could be a drum, it could be anything. And now if I test it with children, the moment you grow up is when the bucket only becomes the bucket. That's like the scary part, when you lose this this magic, so to say. So I think we should go back to never losing this moment where it can be anything. Because once you start labeling everything in the world with just one thing, it loses its potential. And
Amen, man. And we're on the same page. And you were saying about planting the seeds for the future, and I think you were doing that. I mean, you're one of these people who are at the cutting edge of the change of a paradigm in the world, and it must be such a fortunate and rewarding place to be.
Definitely. And I really also feel like it's now time to really show different business models and different approaches to things where, we can basically adopt this mindset that you have in software, that you basically create a couple of lines of code, you share it open source, and everyone around the world can start using it. And this is really this mindset, I think, that is different maybe to traditional ways of doing business or of organizing things. It's this collaborative mindset that we can all benefit if we start using our Lego blocks, to get back to that metaphor, to have other people build upon. This is really something I foresee in the near future, that it's going to accelerate everything. Once you start opening up the knowledge or the gain that you have to others, you get this constant ping pong back and forth of improvement. And if we do this collectively, we can do way greater things than we're doing right now.
Absolutely, Vince. Well, and where can people get in touch with you and find out more about your work?
The easiest way is social media. So Vince Meens, MEENS. I constantly spam about this topic, of course. so it's not difficult to stay up to date. Another thing I would really like to emphasize is this project called Mobotic, because we're really developing this open source, open hardware vehicle that anyone can build locally. It uses local energy, is locally financed, and all these vehicles, they will basically have their own wallet on the blockchain, and they will make their own income, and they will start giving humans again the assignment to build the next vehicle. So for me, this is going to be like the test. If we can create something that is not centrally controlled, and if we can do it for something as tangible as mobility, I hope a lot of business models will start following with this approach, and thereby we can start challenging the traditional centralized approach in society. And if you do this once in one location and you open source it, then anyone in the world can start copying it and improving on it, and share their updates and their learnings constantly back and forth to each other. And if we do this collectively, we can change the world way quicker than any science fiction movie can predict.
Well, that's a great way to finish, Vince. Vince Meens, blockchain evangelist. If you win, we win. Thanks for joining us.
Exactly. Thank you.
Nice one, Vince.